Hi, I'm Bob.
And I'm Carey.
And we're with the Brennaman Group, and today we're going to take you guys on a tour of the French Quarter here in Charleston, South Carolina. The French Quarter originally got its name due to preservation efforts that started in 1973. And before that, really kind of got tied to the French due to the high number of French residents and merchants that lived here a long time ago.
And the French Quarter encompasses to the east the Cooper River, over to the west Meeting Street, and then south to Broad Street, and then north to Hazel Street, which is just past the market. Broad Street is actually the southernmost border of the French Quarter. It was just the broadest street at the time that it was formed in Charleston, so that's where it gets its name, Broad Street.
Today, Broad Street really consists of real estate offices and restaurants. One of my favorite restaurants for a long time down here is Oak Steakhouse. You know, we can compare it to Hall's, but not quite on the same parallel, but definitely worth checking out. Also, the Blind Tiger is an old establishment in Charleston, a great bar to come hang out at. All right, y'all, we are turned off of Broad Street and we're walking up State Street, just right past 7th State Street, and it was the Union Insurance building at one time. Today it houses an attorney's office. It was built in 1811, and it is an example of classic revival style architecture.
And if you look at the top, there's a huge version of a fire insurance marker. And typically you'll see them throughout the city on different homes, and they're a lot smaller. There were several fire insurance companies here in Charleston. If you had a policy with a certain company, they would give you a plaque, and that way if your house was burning down, they would know that you held the policy and they would put the fire out. However, if a fire truck was coming by and they worked for a different company and your house was burning down and that fire truck was not with that company that you held the policy with, then they would just keep going and they wouldn't put the fire out. So now we are on Chalmer Street, and Chalmer Street is one of the only or very few remaining cobblestone streets here in Charleston. The cobblestones actually came over as ballast on ships from England. They were able to use these cobblestones to build streets. They also use the cobblestones to landfill the city. A lot of people don't know this, but Charleston is actually 75% landfill.
And as we're passing down Chalmer Street, we're going right past the Pink House here, which is on 17 Chalmers. It was built in 1712, which makes it one of the oldest buildings in South Carolina. It housed an ale house that dates back to the colonial days, and it's made of Bermuda stone, which was brought over via ship. Y'all, we're continuing our tour of the French Quarter, and we're walking up Church Street. To our left is the French Huguenot Church, and Carey is going to tell you guys a little bit about it.
So the French Huguenot or French Huguenot Church was actually founded in 1681. French Huguenots or French Huguenots were actually French Protestants who fled France in the 1680s because of the revocation of the Edict of Nantes and came over to Charleston in America. And the building itself was built in 1844. And they actually used to do services in French up until about 1828, and then they started doing them in English. And then over to the right, we have the Dock Street Theater. The Dock Street Theater is actually one of the oldest theaters in America, if not the oldest theater. The first production was actually done in 1736, but the original building burnt down in the Great Fire of 1740. And actually, this building that is housed in now was built as a hotel originally, and then became a theater again in 1935.
All right, y'all, we are passing by 116 Church Street, which is also known as the Canon Kirkland House. It was built in 1790 from 18 to 1810, and is a great example of Charleston single architecture.
And the Charleston single style of architecture was developed in the city to save space. So on the street side, it was one room wide, and it would actually have the porches on the side because they were trying to get the best use of the winds coming off the harbor.
All right, guys, so we are walking through Washington Park, also known as Washington Square, because it houses a replica of the Washington Monument.
Washington Monument is over here in this park, and it was actually designed by architect Robert Mills, who designed the fireproof building, which is right behind us. It was built in 1827, and it actually today is home of the South Carolina Historical Society, where I used to work. So it houses a lot of archival records, family records, things like that, old photographs, and it's actually a library. You can become a member and do research there. So it is sort of open to the public.
We are walking through one of the oldest cemeteries in the United States with grave markers dating back to the 1680s. We're at the Circular Congregational Church here on Meeting Street, and Carey's going to share a little of her knowledge about.
The Circular Congregational Church was actually formed originally in 1681. It was formed by some residents of Charleston who decided that they did not want to be part of the Anglican Church anymore. At the time, they called it a meeting house instead of a church, and so that's actually where Meeting Street gets its name from. This building is the third building on this site. This actual church itself, the building was built in 1890.
All right, guys, we're standing in front of the Powder Magazine. It is the oldest surviving public building in the Carolinas. It was built in 1713 and is now being used as a museum.
Yep, and it's run by the National Society of the Colonial Dames.
All right, y'all, so we are back on Church Street, and we're walking past St. Phillips Church, which is the oldest church in Charleston. It was established in 1680.
This building that we see behind us was actually built in 1844 to 1845. What's interesting about this is kind of a fun story is that John C. Calhoun, the great nullifier, was actually buried in this churchyard and is still buried in this churchyard. But during the war between the states, they moved his body so that the Union soldiers wouldn't be able to find it and desecrate it during the war. Okay, so now we're in the market, which is one of probably the most well-known spots in Charleston. And the market was originally given to the city, this land, in 1788 by Charles Coatsworth Pinckney. And it was given to be specifically used as a public market, and it still is a public market today. You can buy a lot of good stuff from local artists. And
I'll say, you know, from a personal standpoint, some 26 years ago when I came to Charleston, this is the first place I got to visit, and it's really what drew me in. I can't say that I come down here very often now, except to dine. There's some good restaurants around here. Anson's and Hank's being one of my favorite seafood restaurants just around the corner.
The thing I love about the French Quarter is it's kind of already set in its ways, so I think you get a little bit of a neighborhood vibe. There's so many residential spots kind of intermixed with this commercial, scene that you end up having this kind of hometown vibe. So what I like is you can walk around and kind of see a million faces on any given day and a friendly face around every corner. And when it comes to kind of spots, it's kind of neat because I'm a bit of a routine-based ritual guy. So I like going to Normandy Farms and getting my little, breakfast sandwich. We feel really fortunate in this space. This building's from 1670, and it's been an art space since 1919. So we feel like it's already kind of oozing out of the walls that this was a creative location, and now we just signed a 15-year lease to stay here for the long haul and kind of watch Charleston grow. Well, I went to school up in Rhode Island, at Rhode Island School of Design, and my then fiance, now wife, was up there as well. Every single person in the Boston and kind of Providence area that we were hanging out in was moving to New York. So I did a little research and found that 10,000 painters a year moved to New York City. So rather than jump into kind of a rat race and a networking kind of game, we decided to kind of travel down the East Coast and see if we could find a city that kind of oozed that cultural vibe that we were looking for, but where you could see yourself being an artist for about, 30, 50 years or so. And the moment we stepped foot in Charleston, it was pretty much a done deal. So for me, I wanted to just make art that was kind of authentic. And I tend to be optimistic. I like levity, I like humor, I like light. I meet so many people who don't feel comfortable in art galleries. They think of white walls and concrete floors and walking in the door and somebody sizing up their shoes, and if they don't have an art knowledge and can't speak with the vocabulary of art, then they don't feel comfortable. I think art is a completely opposite situation where it's democratic, it belongs to everybody, it's a public service like anything else, and what you like about it is what you like about it. My hope is that somebody who's never felt comfortable in an art gallery walks through here, kind of feels comfortable enough with all the couches and the swing and all these things, and see some work on the wall that somehow resonates with them a little bit, and they go home and they bake banana bread, or they work in their garden, or they do whatever it is, their own kind of creative source. I have no belief in talent whatsoever. I think people have slight aptitudes towards things, and after that it's just time. We try to embrace kids. I was fortunate enough to have people who supported me when I was young, and I think it's one of the neatest occupations you can possibly follow is to become a creative and follow your passions. So every single kid that walks in the door, we give them a free sketchbook.
Well, talk to me about the art scene in Charleston. Obviously, you said you and Megan were attracted to it out of college.
When we got here, what we realized what was happening was we were actually witnessing this turnover of galleries. So you're starting to find more galleries that weren't catering just towards regional work, where you do have marsh scenes and oceanscapes. And what's happening now is people are starting to bring contemporary artists from all over the world in every different type of genre. Artists are moving here, kind of flocking here because of the cultural scene and the restaurants and food. So what we've witnessed is kind of, this scene is, I feel like, growing up, but the personality of Charleston is still very much intertwined, and everyone just loves on each other, supports each other, and in that support you feel like the whole scene is kind of getting better and better each year. So I feel like the sky's the limit, and we're on this precipice of this being, you know, a world-renowned art scene.